Mike is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania. He's got a master's in ancient history. The University of Wisconsin has a PhD in Hebrew Bible and Semitic studies. He has a dozen years of classroom teachings experience on the college level and another 10 in distant education. He's currently a scholar in residence at Logos Bible Software, and it's a company that produces ancient text database and other digital resources for study on the ancient world and biblical studies. Now, I didn't even jump into all your books, all the other things you've written. So, Mike, why don't you tell me more about you and just some of the books you've written? I know you got a podcast. Just, man, let's give us a 30,000 view of you, man.
Yeah, well, I mean, those are the basics that you just read. I don't do green classroom teaching anymore. It's just DE. But I am a biblical scholar by training, but I'm also a normal person. My background's pretty blue collar. I've had 35 jobs since leaving high school. I worked my way full time through 15 years of graduate school and had 4 kids while doing it. You know, my passion is that I really believe that the average person in the pew actually wants content. They want to be taught. They want to know Scripture. And my little motto is I will no longer protect people from their Bible. I'm done with that. I'm serious about it because I can tell you other professors, pastors, and the places I've taught have said things to me like, you know, we need to remember that there are just some things about the Bible that people shouldn't know.
Wow, that would make me offended immediately.
Yep. Well, it worked for me. I mean, you know, I reject that thinking. I think people are routinely underestimated. Leadership in the church, I think, habitually underestimates the appetite for content and the capacity to receive it. And so I want to take high scholarship, peer-reviewed scholarship, and make it translatable, decipherable to the normal person. You know, most scholars spend all their time writing for other scholars. They write for the guild because of peer review and, you know, got to get tenure and all this sort of thing. Well, what sort of drives the bus for me is to be able to communicate that content in just everyday language and have people really experience the thrill of rediscovery. You read Supernatural, which is, again, the entry point for what I do. There's an academic version of that content called The Unseen Realm. And what I'm trying to do in both is really get people, this isn't marketing shtick, I'm serious about it, to read their Bible again for the first time. I want the ancient Israelite, the first century Jew, living in your head so that you can read the Bible the way the original writers, you know, thought. I mean, what they wanted to communicate, I want people to catch that. There's a lot of weird stuff in Scripture. It's there for a reason. If it's weird, it's important. It plays a role in worldview and our thinking. And I have just found that people want to learn something. They want the Bible to make sense. And part of the obstacles, you know, one of the obstacles to doing that is that we think that our context or something modern, you know, like the Reformation or the Catholic Church or whatever denomination, that's the context. That's the filter for understanding the Bible. It's actually not. The right context for interpreting the Bible is the context that produced the thing. And we just don't teach people to, again, think the way the original writer thought and the original reader thought. And if we did that, if we trained our senses to that, we'd get a lot more out of it.
I absolutely agree. I want to ask you, we're going to bounce around a lot, I think, because you really intrigued me, to be honest, after reading your website and your book. But what made you go down this journey to pursue the depth of biblical stuff that you do?
Well, I didn't have any spiritual upbringing. I was a Christian. I became a Christian in high school, and I was the only believer in my family. And it was a pretty antagonistic situation. My parents thought I had joined a cult. Well, they did. I mean, they were, I would say they were basically irreligious. They had their own backgrounds, but, you know, we never went anywhere, and it was not a factor in life at all. But then when I became a believer and actually started taking it seriously, they were alarmed and, antagonistic. I mean, I had situations where in high school we had a class, the Bible as literature. Well, guess who wasn't allowed to take their Bible to school? I mean, everybody else is probably not even believers. They've all got Bibles, and there I am. I'm not allowed to take it. I'm not allowed to go to this or that church or this or that, youth group activity. And I just believe that, if I do the right thing, if I honor my parents, then, that will matter at some point. And it did, not right now. I mean, they're believers now, but it took 25 years for God essentially to crush them, to love them into submission. And they admitted, they have admitted to me, they said things like, hey, we used to do things, to you and say things in front of you just to see what you would do. I walked into an argument between my parents one day. They were wondering if I was gay because I didn't go out and, fool around in the car with girls. And it's just bizarre. My mom yelled at me one time for not doing drugs like the normal kids.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's just this crazy stuff. I knew it then. I knew enough as a believer to know that they're doing that because they're under conviction, or they want to see it if it's authentic, or it was their way of trying to probe that. But it got us into some really interesting situations. So, that the only thing I was really good at, I played a lot of sports, but the only thing I was really, really good at was academics. And so eventually I could fill your hour with stupid stuff that I've done or thought, because I'll just give you this one instance. It wasn't until I was a senior in high school that I learned that pastors got paid. This is how out of touch I was with the religious world. And when I found that out, I thought, what? Like, people will pay you to study the Bible and talk about it? Like, really? And that was just, I was always interested in anything old and weird, but, and the Bible has lots of both of those things. But when I found that out, it's like, man, this is what I want to do. And I loved scripture. I loved ancient languages. I was just good at that. That's what I wanted to do. And so I eventually wound up picking Hebrew Bible and Semitic languages because I really came to believe that was where there were the most problems of interpretation, the things that were just sort of hardest, to figure out and understand in Scripture. So that's literally how I could have gone into any of the areas, but I thought this is where the most weird stuff is, the biggest questions, and this is where I'm just going to land. The rest, I guess, is sort of history. But again, it was a very long, difficult process because I didn't have any help. I didn't have any guidance. Here's another, again, I could fill the hour with stupid stuff. I'm taking my SATs. This will give you a clue as to how clueless I was. I'm taking my SATs in high school. My parents had not gone to college. I'm just isolated in all sorts of ways. So at the end of the SAT, they want you to put a number in to have your scores sent where, well, nobody told me that. Like, I don't have a number for this. What do I do? Because I wasn't allowed to hand it in unless I put a number in there, one of these school codes. And so I put in the University of Kentucky. Why, you ask? Because I went to high school with Sam Bowie. And I thought, well, if I go to Kentucky, at least I'll know someone. That was the extent of my thought process. My whole life has sort of been like that, where it just sort of happened. And to be honest with you, most of the major decisions I've made have really been because God has put me in a situation where I couldn't mess it up. Essentially taking alternatives away, and it's like, well, here you go, jump in there and we'll see what happens. And so there's just been a lot like that. And, I've never sort of lost the fascination with Scripture. And again, because of, I think because of who I was, I really, I didn't know anything. My first exposure to the gospel was when I was 9. It was through a friend who lived next door to my grandma. I was at my grandma's a lot because my parents got divorced. And so the single mom, 4 kids, 2 of them had cystic fibrosis. I don't know. I think about it today. It's like, how did they survive? Because she didn't have an income, but I'd go over there and they would have, like a family Bible time. And my friend who was 9 was like, he just amazed me at his Bible knowledge, and no, this is not an exaggeration. Here's what I knew. I had heard of Jesus. I had heard of Noah, and I had heard of Adam and Eve. I was tapped at that point, but that was, my beginning. And then it was through the same family when I finally was in high school that I came to the Lord. But my whole life has just been like that kind of thing. So I'd like to say, man, I was really wise here. I was really smart. Boy, that was an excellent decision. Okay, I can't claim credit for basically anything. That's just the way it is.
I like that. One thing that you talked about was obviously going into the study of ancient language and the history of the Bible, I've always been fascinated with that because I remember getting saved at an early age, and I say early in my 20s, but I remember thinking, like, there's got to be so much more that we're missing. Now, I don't know anything about Hebrew, but I just remember thinking that, sitting in church, thinking out of all the people, how many times it's been rewritten, different languages. Again, like you said, the person who wrote it, understanding the culture, like there's so much behind it that we don't get.
Mm-hmm.